The shop opens at 10, but I'm always there by 9:30. Habit, mostly. I like the half hour before customers come in, when the air still smells like paper and old wood, and the light through the front windows is thin and cold. She's usually there before me. Always. By the time I come in, she's in the little garden behind the store, watering the potted basil, wiping dust from the bench, sometimes reading with her legs tucked under her. That morning, she wasn't reading. She was sitting on the bench, elbows on her knees, looking down at her hands. Her hair, usually tied back, was loose, falling over her face. It wasn't until I saw the slow movement of her shoulders that I realized she was crying. I stopped at the doorway, holding the box of returned books against my chest. I don't think she saw me right away. I thought about going inside, just pretending I hadn't noticed. But then she wiped her face quickly, like someone caught, and looked up. "Oh," she said. Her voice was rough. "You're early." "Yeah." I set the box down by the door. "Do you want me to come back in a minute?" She shook her head, half smiling like she was embarrassed. "No. Sit, if you want." I hesitated, then crossed the small patch of grass and sat at the far end of the bench. The wood was cold through my jeans. We didn't say anything for a while. She picked at the corner of a napkin she'd been holding, tearing it into thin strips. I kept my eyes on the basil plant in front of us, pretending to study the leaves. "You ever get mornings where you just can't get started?" she asked finally. "Most of them," I said. She let out a small laugh, one that caught in her throat. Her eyes were a little red, but there was something steady in the way she looked at me now. I wanted to ask what had happened. But instead, I asked, "Coffee?" She nodded. "Strong. No sugar." That was her usual. She remembered mine, 2 black, 1 sugar, and always made sure it was ready before I'd even ask. Little things like that stick. When I came back out with 2 mugs, she was leaning back against the bench, looking up at the sky through the leaves. She took hers without a word, wrapping both hands around it. We sat there, drinking in silence. A bird landed on the edge of the garden wall, then flew off. Somewhere down the street, a car horn blared. "I keep thinking about," she stopped. Shook her head. "Never mind." "What?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time. Long enough for me to notice the faint crease at the corner of her mouth, the way her thumb tapped once against the mug. "Don't leave," she said quietly. It wasn't a plea. More like a request she'd been holding in for too long. I didn't answer right away. I just set my coffee down on the bench beside me and folded my hands together, trying to think of something that didn't sound stupid. Inside, the phone started ringing. Neither of us moved. We didn't talk about that morning for the rest of the day. She moved around the shop as if it hadn't happened, ringing up customers, dusting shelves, pulling new titles from the back. I matched her rhythm, shelving returns, making small talk with the regulars. But every time I passed her in the narrow aisles, the words stuck in my head. "Don't leave." It wasn't until closing that she lingered at the counter, running a cloth over the glass in slow, circular motions. "Do you remember," she said, without looking up, "when your dad brought you here the first time?" I shook my head. "I was what, 8? "You wouldn't stop asking questions," she said, smiling faintly. "About why some books were on high shelves. Why the old register still worked. You asked me if I liked my job. And what did you say?" "That it was the best part of my day." "And your dad said, mine too." Her voice faltered just slightly at the end. She set the cloth down, resting her hands flat on the counter. For a moment, I imagined reaching across the wood to cover them with mine. But I didn't move. Instead, I said, he'd be glad you kept the place going. She looked up at me then, really looked, like she was trying to read something in my face. I had to glance away, pretending to check the front door lock. There's a weight in moments like that. A knowing, and the careful act of ignoring it. We stayed late, reorganizing the display by the window. She handed me a stack of books, her fingers brushing mine in the exchange. It wasn't deliberate, but I felt it. I think she did too. The risk was always there, quietly pulsing between us. She'd known me when I was small enough to fall asleep on the shop's back couch while my dad worked. She was older, in ways that weren't just about years, married once, divorced for nearly a decade, with a life of habits and quiet evenings. And me. I was still figuring out what my life was supposed to be. By the time we finished, the street outside was dark, the glow from the shop's lamps spilling onto the sidewalk. She made tea before we left, setting my mug beside hers at the counter. We didn't talk much. Just the sound of the spoon tapping against porcelain, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the back. When I picked up my bag to leave, she reached over and fixed the collar of my jacket. A small thing. Just her fingertips brushing against my neck, adjusting the fabric so it sat right. But I felt that touch long after I stepped outside. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next week, things felt different. Not in anything we said, more in the way we paused. The way our eyes met a second too long before one of us looked away. Wednesday morning, she was behind the counter, sorting receipts. I brought her a tea without asking. She glanced up, smiled like she was about to say something, then didn't. Just wrapped her hands around the mug and went back to the papers. I told myself I was imagining it. That maybe I wanted there to be something where there wasn't. But then, in the quiet after lunch, we were shelving in the back room. It's a narrow space, barely enough for two people to pass without turning sideways. She reached for the top shelf, stretching, and the hem of her sweater lifted just slightly. I caught myself watching. Looked away too fast. "You okay?" she asked, still looking at the books. "Yeah. Just, tired." She nodded, like she didn't believe me but wasn't going to press. That was when the bell over the front door rang, sharp, too loud in the stillness. We both stepped back from each other, as if someone had walked in on something. It was just May, one of the regulars. She lingered at the counter, chatting in that knowing way older women sometimes have. "You two make a good team," she said with a wink. I busied myself behind the shelves, pretending to straighten books that didn't need straightening. My ears burned. Later, after May left, she said, almost lightly, "She probably thinks you're still a kid. Maybe you think that too." Silence. She turned back to her stack of returns. "You should lock up tonight. I'll head out early." The air shifted after that. Not cold, just, careful. I finished shelving alone, listening for her footsteps in the front, but she stayed at the counter until the last customer left. By the time I turned off the lights, she was sitting at the bench in the garden, jacket pulled tight around her. I almost walked past her to the gate, but then she said, without looking up, "It's getting colder." I sat down. She didn't move away. The street lamps outside the fence gave just enough light to see her face, soft, unreadable. I was going to ask, she stopped, biting her lip. "Never mind." "What?" Her eyes met mine. There was something in them, something I couldn't name but felt all the same. She leaned in just slightly, and for a heartbeat, I thought, then she pulled back, tucking her hair behind her ear. "We should go." We didn't touch. But the space between us felt full enough to drown in. It was raining by the time we closed. Not heavy, just enough to turn the street lamps into blurred halos. She stood at the front window, watching people hurry past with umbrellas, her coat still hanging on the hook. "You walking?" I asked, wiping down the counter. "I like the rain," she said, but made no move to leave. I grabbed my bag. "I'll walk you." She didn't argue. We stepped outside, the air damp and cool, the smell of wet asphalt settling around us. The shop's light faded behind us as we turned the corner toward her street. We walked side by side, close enough that our sleeves brushed when the sidewalk narrowed. She kept her hands in her pockets, head down, and I tried to think of something ordinary to say. But the quiet between us felt too loaded for small talk. Halfway down the block, she stopped under the awning of a closed cafe. Water dripped from the edge, hitting the pavement in slow, irregular beats. "May came by again today," she said. "Asked me if you were seeing anyone." I froze. "What did you say?" "That I didn't know." She looked at me then, eyes steady. But the way she asked. I think she already decided what she wanted to believe. I searched her face for a trace of humor, but there was none. Just something raw, maybe curiosity, maybe something else. "Does it bother you?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "What bothers me is that it might bother me. And it shouldn't." I didn't know what to do with that. I shifted my weight, hands tightening on the strap of my bag. "You're here every day," she said, softer now. "It's easy to forget, you won't always be." "That's not decided," I said quickly. She gave a small, almost sad smile. "Everything's decided, eventually." Rain pooled near our shoes, rippling with each drop. I wanted to reach for her then, just to close the space, to prove her wrong. Instead, I said, "What if I stayed?" Her breath caught, so quiet I might have imagined it. "You'd regret it," she said. "One day." "Maybe," I said. "But not today." We stood there, the street empty, the sound of the rain the only thing moving between us. She looked at me like she was weighing something, deciding if she could let it tip. Her hand twitched at her side, just enough that I noticed. Just enough that I almost reached for it. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "And if I asked you not to?" The question hung there, damp and heavy, refusing to move. She didn't come in the next morning. No text. No note taped to the door. Just me, unlocking the shop alone, turning on the lights, feeling the stillness settle in like a weight. I told myself she'd be late. Maybe errands. Maybe an appointment she forgot to mention. But she didn't come the day after, either. On the third day, she walked in halfway through the afternoon, carrying a grocery bag and avoiding my eyes. Her hair was pinned up in a way I hadn't seen before, neater, like she'd been somewhere formal. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said too quickly, setting the bag on the counter. "Just, things to take care of." I didn't push. But I noticed how she stayed on the far side of the shop, busying herself with inventory, shelving in the back. She didn't linger in the garden. Didn't share tea. The distance felt deliberate, and I couldn't stop replaying our last conversation under the cafe awning. "And if I asked you not to?" I'd thought it was the start of something. Maybe it had been the start of her deciding to end it. A customer came in, a man, maybe mid-50s, in a tailored coat. They talked in low voices near the register. I caught enough to know they knew each other well. She laughed at something he said, but it didn't sound like her usual laugh. When he left, she didn't mention him. Just went back to the ledger, pen scratching softly against paper. I stayed later than I needed to that night, pretending to tidy the shelves. She finished locking up without waiting for me, keys jangling in her hand as she walked out into the dim street. I watched her go from the front window, the back of her coat disappearing into the rain. At home, I pulled out my phone more times than I could count. Typed messages. Deleted them. Everything okay? Did I do something? No. Delete. The next morning, I made her coffee the way she liked it and left it on the counter before she arrived. By noon, it was still there, cold. That night, I passed by the little cafe we'd walked to before. She was inside, alone, staring at something on her phone. I thought about going in. About sitting across from her and asking what happened. But I kept walking. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was late when I finally knocked on her door. I didn't plan it, I'd just been walking, passing familiar streets, until I was standing in front of her building with my hands in my pockets. She opened it after a moment, wearing an oversized sweater, hair pulled back. "You could have called," she said, but without any real sharpness. "I didn't know if you'd answer," I said. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked into the kitchen, the smell of chamomile tea in the air. A single mug sat on the counter, steam curling up into the dim light. "You've been gone," I said. "I've been here." She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "Just, not at the shop." I nodded, waiting for her to fill the space. She didn't. "I thought maybe I did something," I said finally. Her eyes softened. "You didn't. That's the problem." I frowned. "How is that a problem?" "Because you make it easy," she said, her voice low. "Too easy to forget the rest of the world. And I can't. I can't afford to forget." We stood there, the hum of the fridge filling the quiet. My chest felt tight, like if I breathed too deeply it would all spill out. "I don't care if it's easy," I said. "I just don't want it to stop." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "You think you mean that now? But you have so much ahead of you. I've already lived through most of my firsts. You haven't even started." "That's not yours to decide," I said, softer than I meant to. She looked up at me then, and it wasn't guarded anymore. Just tired, and honest. "I'm scared," she said. It was the first time she'd said it, the thing that had been sitting between us for weeks. Not about what people would think, or the years between us. Just the fear of letting something in that could change everything. I stepped closer, not too close, but enough that I could see the fine lines at the corner of her eyes, the way her breath caught. "Me too," I said. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she reached out, almost like she wasn't sure she meant to, and touched my hand. Just her fingers resting lightly against mine, warm and still. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't an answer. But it was the first time in weeks that I didn't feel paused. She gave a small nod, as if to say, "Okay." And for now, that was enough. By spring, the shop felt lighter. Maybe it was the longer days, or the fact that she'd started coming in earlier again. Sometimes I'd arrive to find the door already unlocked, the bell above it still swaying from her coming through. We never talked about that night in her kitchen. We didn't need to. Something had shifted, not a leap, but a slow, steady turn. At 8:47 one morning, I found her in the garden, not crying this time, but crouched by the basil plant, trimming the leaves. A mug of black coffee sat on the bench beside her. Mine, already fixed the way I liked it. "You're early," I said. She smiled without looking up. "So are you." We fell into a new rhythm. She'd work the front, I'd handle the back, and somewhere in between we'd meet at the counter with tea or coffee, the way we used to, but now there was no pause before the handoff. Sometimes our fingers brushed and neither of us pretended not to notice. People still talked. May made her usual comments. Customers sometimes lingered on us with that look that says they're trying to work out the math in their heads. We let it pass. Life wasn't perfect. Some mornings she came in tired, distracted. Some evenings I left with questions I didn't ask. But there was no more pulling away. No more days when her coffee sat untouched on the counter. One rainy Tuesday, we closed early and sat on the bench, jackets pulled tight. She handed me a mug of tea, steam curling into the cool air. "Remember the first time you sat here with me?" she asked. I nodded. "You told me not to leave." She glanced at me, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Guess you listened." We sat in silence after that, listening to the rain on the garden fence. My hand rested on the bench between us, palm open. After a moment, hers found it. Warm, steady. Not tight, not claiming, just there. It wasn't about a declaration anymore. We were past the question of what this was. We'd built something small and sure, and that was enough. Looking back now, I think the thing that kept me was never the shop, or the coffee, or even her laugh. It was that first morning in the garden, when she couldn't hide what she was feeling, and didn't try to. Some things don't need finishing. They just need keeping.